In this lesson, I'm going to be taking you through the 2 exam style questions for the education policy topic. We're going to be looking at a 10 marker, which will focus on the impacts of global marketisation, and then we will look at a 30 marker, which will evaluate the marketisation and privatisation policies in terms of equality of education. So we'll start off with the 10 marker with item. So just as a reminder to take you through the process of planning this question, the first thing we're going to do is deconstruct the question, making sure that we understand exactly what it is that we need to be doing and what we're being asked to do. We then identify possible answers, so what could we do, just like we would with a 10 marker that doesn't have an item. Once we've got those possible answers, we can look for the hooks in the items, because remember, we can't find hooks if we don't know what we're looking for. And then I'll take you through a model paragraph. Now, just a reminder again, you do need to write your own paragraph after you have completed the plan for the 10 marker. So we're going to deconstruct the question first of all. Now, with every 10 marker with item, we've got the same 2 command words, analyze and apply. And what that means is we have to use the item explicitly in our answer, and that means I'm looking for phrases such as the item says, the item indicates. I need to see the 2 words, the item. But it needs to be used appropriately. You can't just shove it in there and kind of go, yeah, I use the item. You need to use it appropriately and you need to use it accurately, and that's where the analysis comes in. How does this element of the item support your answer? How does it support your paragraph? So the topic is education policies, because that's the area we're looking at in education, and our focus is marketisation policies and their impacts. So I'm not looking for you to describe marketisation to me. We're looking at the impact that marketisation has had on the education system. The next step then is to identify possible answers. So we need to think about what the impacts of marketisation policies might be on education. So we're not looking at identifying what the policies are. That's going to be part of our explanation. What we're looking for are how these policies have influenced and impacted education. So for example, we've got the fact that there is more parental choice. Parents can now choose the best school for their child. They have more choice over the type of education their child receives. And we've also got more competition between schools through policies such as league tables, Ofsted reports and funding formula. All of these have created more competition between individual schools. So what we need to think about when we're thinking of our points is how has marketisation impacted education, not what policies has there been for marketisation. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video here and see if you can come up with 3 more points or 3 more ways that marketisation policies have impacted education. Our next stage then is, once we've got our points, is to find the hooks in the item. And what that means is looking at the item and seeing how you could link that into your answer that you've identified, the impact that you've identified. Now, not all 5 of the points that you've got will impact or will link to the item, but at least 2 of them have to, because 2 of them, each paragraph has to have a link to the item. So if we look at the item we've got here, and we can see how it is that the item links to the 2 points that I have identified. So we can look at this one here, the more parental choice. Parents now have some choice in the school which they send their children to. Ofsted and league tables help to find the best schools. So that sentence there can link to the fact that parents have more choice. And we can also talk about competition between schools. We can link that to this bit here: schools that produce better results would be popular with parents and students and pupils. So showing that there is competition between schools for pupils. So parents want to send their children to the best schools, so schools want to get good results. So again, I'd like to pause the video here and see how the points that you have identified will link into the item. So you've got to think, how is it that I can link these points in? You can use the elements of the item that I've already used, and not all points will link to the item, so it's about finding which ones do. So pause the video here and see if you can link your points to the item. So now we're on to looking at the paragraph and working and writing our paragraph in a way that the exam board want. So we use the system of identify, explain, link, and then our application goes where it fits. So it might be that it'd be part of your point or be part of your identification. It might be part of the explanation, but you put it where it fits. And I'm not looking for just a sentence that says, the item says this. You need to incorporate it into your paragraph. You need to make it so that it flows. It's evidentiary. It's not just shoved in there. Because if you just shove it in there, you're not showing analysis. And therefore you won't get the higher marks. Yes, you'll get marks for that paragraph because you've used the item, but you need to incorporate it more fully into your answer. So if we look at my model paragraph here, I've very clearly identified my impact. So I'm talking about more parental choice. So it has led to more choice for parents when it comes to choosing the school to send their child to. So that is my point. That is my identification. That's my point. I've then used the item here. As the item shows, marketisation policies have included the introduction of league tables and Ofsted inspections, which help parents find the best choice of school for their child. Now, as you can see there, I have not quoted, I've paraphrased. I've incorporated the item into my explanation. It's all embedded, it's all linked together, so it feels like it flows. I've then carried on my explanation with another policy, so along with open enrollment policy, which allows parents to apply to any state school, then my link. This shows marketisation policies have created more choice in more parental choice. Okay, so I've incorporated my item so that it feels more part of the paragraph. It doesn't feel like an add-on. It feels, it reads, it flows, it makes sense. Okay, so your task now is to complete the rest of the plan, making sure you've got at least 3 more points that could be made, and one of those points must be linked to the item. And then I want you to write your own paragraph, but you can't use parental choice because I've already given you the model paragraph for that. So you need to come up with another point which links to the item to explain, to answer the question, what are the impacts of marketisation on education? So moving on now, we're going to look at the essay question. And as ever with an essay question, we're going to take you through completing the planning sheet step by step. So we're going to deconstruct the question to make sure that we know what it is we're being asked and what it is that we need to talk about. We're going to identify which of the 3 types of context we need for this particular question and why. We'll then identify our content points, so what could be our arguments for and against, what are going to be the possible points that we could make. Link those points to the item, and again, on your plan, you need to highlight the item and show how you're linking it to your content points. Not all content points will link, but those that do, you do need to do so on your plan, and then looking at how you decide your answer. I am not going to tell you what your answer is. You need to decide that for yourself. So, looking at deconstructing the question then. When it comes to an essay question, it's always the same two command words. Apply, meaning use the item explicitly somewhere in your essay. One paragraph has to have the item, one paragraph without the item, the other two, your choice. Because some items will have lots of information you can use, some will be less useful. But at least one paragraph must utilize the item, just like we did with the 10 marker. And evaluate. And when we talk about evaluation, we are talking about looking at all possible arguments and coming to a reasoned conclusion based on sociological evidence. So you have to decide which side of the fence you're going to be on. You cannot sit on the fence. The fence is barbed wire, electrified, non-fire. You can't sit on it. You have to decide one way or the other. Our topic is education policies, because that's what we're looking at. And our focus is marketisation and privatisation policies, but looking specifically at whether or not they create greater inequality or not. So our focus is about the impacts of these policies again. So I'm not looking at you for you to describe marketisation policies or privatisation policies. I'm looking for you to tell me about whether their impact has created more inequality or not. And we know this is an argument essay because it says evaluate the claim. So that tells us that it is an argument essay. So we need to say, look at reasons why it has caused greater inequality and reasons why it hasn't, and decide which way we're going to argue. So next, we're looking at context. So context is showing the examiner the background, showing the examiner we know what we're talking about. And as we said before, there are three types of context. We've got background, we've got definition, and we've got trend. Now for this question, we are going to be using definition, because we need to define privatisation and marketisation, because a non-sociologist may not know what they mean. So our first two sentences of our introduction will define marketisation and define privatisation. Now, just to be clear, privatisation does not mean creating more private schools. It means bringing private businesses into the education system. It might be privatisation of education, whereby we see business practices in the daily processes of schools, or privatisation in education, where certain elements are given outsourced to private companies. But we need to define marketisation and privatisation for this one. So it's a definition context, because they are key sociological terms that a non-sociologist possibly wouldn't know. Okay, so identifying our points. When we're identifying our points, we are showing both for. So marketisation and privatisation have led to increased educational inequality, and against, have not led to increased educational equality. So remember, you are finishing off this sentence. So you can't necessarily use a policy as a point. You can't say marketisation and privatisation have led to greater inequality because of open enrolment. The open enrolment is the policy, it's not the impact. It's not telling me why that has led to greater inequality. So for example, we could say it has led to greater inequality because better schools end up with more funding. So here I'm linking to the funding formula and to league tables, where schools that have more pupils receive more money. And also, and then on the other side, marketisation and privatisation have not led to increased educational inequality because it has raised standards in all schools. So by creating that competition, Ofsted, league tables, things like that, it's actually increased, raised standards, which has decreased inequality. It's made the education system better for all students. Okay, so pause the video here, and you need to come up with at least 3 more reasons why it has created greater inequality and 3 reasons why it hasn't created inequality. Okay, so remember, you're finishing off that sentence. 3 more endings to each side of the argument. Now that we have our content points, we now need to link them to the item. So again, on your plan, you need to be explicit and show which of your points link to which elements of the item. So if we take the 2 points that I mentioned previously, so educational inequality because better schools end up with more funding, and marketisation hasn't led to increased inequality because it's raised standards in schools. If we look at how we can link either of these 2 items, these 2 points to the item. So we can say, we can use, where has it gone? Yeah, aimed at raised standards by increasing parental choice and competition between schools, and we can use that for the against. Okay, so the aim of marketisation policies was to raise standards, so we can show that we can link that in there. The point about schools ending up with more funding, we can't link that to the item. It doesn't mean that we can't use it in our essay. We can still use it in the essay, but it doesn't link directly to the item. So pause the video here and see which of the other points that you have identified can link to the item. So see if you've got points for that could go into the item or points against into the item. But make sure it is explicit on your plan which points link to the item and how, and which don't. Do that by highlighting, please. So the final part of our plan is to decide on our answer. And as I've said before, I can't tell you what your answer is. You have to do that. And that's part of the evaluation, and that's showing analysis skills, that you have weighed up all of the evidence and you have come to a reasoned conclusion based upon the sociological evidence. So for this question, you have to decide, has marketisation and privatisation policies created more inequality? Yes or no? There's no in between, it's yes or no, and that is your decision. You are either going to go yes, it has created more inequality, or no, it hasn't created more inequality. As ever, you cannot sit on the fence. The fence is barbed wire, it's electrified and it's on fire. You can't sit on it. You have to be one side or the other. So once you've decided on your answer, we then get to our chain of reasoning conversation. Now this conversation is important because it helps you get that chain of reasoning. It helps you get a line of argument and makes sure that you stick to it. It gives flow to your answer. It shows analysis. So you've got to, there is a reason for doing this. Okay, but as ever, you work from the bottom up. You don't start at the top, you work at the bottom. All 4 bubbles must be filled in. This is a 30-mark question, so all 4 bubbles must be filled in. Each set of bubbles is a paragraph. So if you haven't got a 4th one, you need to think of one. You need to come up with one, because 3 marks will not, 3 paragraphs will not get you into band 5. You must have 4 paragraphs. Remember, the girls' side is your answer to the question, the boys' side is the evaluation. So whatever you are arguing, if you are arguing greater inequality, you're on the your reasons are going to be on the girls' side. If you are arguing not greater inequality, then that's going to be the girls' side, okay? But do make it a sentence. Having looked at some of your chains of reasoning, some of you are doing it really well, others are still just putting in a bullet point. Make it a conversation. Think of it like a comic strip. That way you can see how it all flows and works together. If you're having an argument with somebody, you wouldn't just say, I believe that it has created greater inequality. You wouldn't leave it at that. You'd have to expand on that if you were having an actual argument with somebody, and that's what this activity is for. So, for example, I believe marketisation has led to greater inequality because the funding formula means good schools have more funding. But have you considered that privatisation policies, such as business-sponsored schools, means that disadvantaged schools get a funding boost? So it's showing a conversation. It's having an argument. It's not just randomly shoving down a bullet point. Okay, so pause the video here and complete your chain of reasoning. Make it detailed. Make it a conversation. So now we're going to put it all together. So we're going to start with the introduction. Now, I'm not going to give you a model introduction. I'm going to tell you what you need to do for your introduction, and then you need to do it. Okay. Now, the reason I'm not going to give you a model is because every paragraph, every essay has to have one, and we've gone through introductions lots of times. So this is just a reminder of what your introduction needs to include. So first of all, we've got our context. So we need to show the examiner we know what this question is about. And then, as we said earlier in the video, that means we need to define marketisation and privatisation. Okay, these are key sociological terms which a non-sociologist may not know. So you have to define those terms for the examiner to show you know what you're talking about. Then you've got your content, which is identifying some of the points for and some of the points against to show the examiner that you know both sides of the argument. Okay, so what are some of the ways that privatisation and marketisation have led to greater inequality, and in what ways hasn't it? So you need to identify, not explain, just identify some of the reasons for and some of the reasons against. And then finally, you need to clearly state your answer. Can't be vague about it. Use the terms of the question. Make sure that you are explicit in answering this question, because if you're not explicit, the rest of your essay is going to be waffle, because your examiner doesn't know what you're arguing. They don't know where you're coming from. So you have to be explicit. That way you won't waffle quite as much. So do marketisation policies create greater inequality or not? Yes or no? It's a binary answer. So main body paragraphs. Now we've gone over this a few times as well, but we're going to go through it again just to make sure that everybody is clear. So we're going to start off with our why. Why have you come to your answer? What is the reason that you think marketisation and privatisation has led to greater inequality, or the reason why you think it hasn't? Then explain it. Teach me. Convince me. It's a persuasive essay. You've got to be convincing. You can't just waffle and say vague statements. You have to persuade me that you are right, and you have the sociology to back it up. So this is where you're going to use the policies, where you're going to talk about the impacts, you're going to look at equality and inequality in education, but you have to be convincing. You are trying to persuade me, okay? Then you're going to have your criticism, so you're going to have to show the counter argument, and this is the boys' side of the chain of reasoning conversation, and that's because there is no one answer. So you can say, but I am aware that this is not the perfect answer, that there is a counter to it, there is a reason why it's not the reason it creates greater inequality, or the reason why it doesn't. You show that counter. But remember, your counter, your evaluation is shorter, than your explanation. If your evaluation is longer, it means that should have been your point. But your evaluation is shorter than your explanation. And then link it back, restate your answer. You want to ram that answer down the examiner's throat. Make it clear at every opportunity, end of your introduction, beginning of each paragraph, end of each paragraph. This is my answer and this is what you need to remember. It also means that you stay on track and you stay with the answer that you've got. Your application comes in the form of sociologists, the item, examples, studies, etc. And every paragraph must have some form of application. Doesn't have to be the item. As we said before, the item can be used in one paragraph. The item mustn't be used in another paragraph. The other two, up to you. One paragraph with, one paragraph without, 2 paragraphs, whatever. Okay. So here's my model paragraph. So get my highlight chart. So I've said that marketisation and privatisation policies have created greater educational inequality. So you can see there, I've used the terms of the question. I'm showing the examiner I have answered the question you have set. I've not twisted it into a question that I want it to be. I've answered the question you have set. Because policies such as the funding formula mean that better schools end up with more funding than a school in deprived areas or is considered not as good. So I'm saying it has because of things like the funding formula. So then this is because the funding formula, so I'm explaining here what the funding formula is and how it has led to greater inequality. So the funding formula means that schools that are oversubscribed get more money than those that are undersubscribed. This creates greater inequality as the undersubscribed schools will not be able to afford the best resources or teachers compared to the oversubscribed schools, further disadvantaging those students. Okay, so all of that is my explanation. I've then got my evaluation. However, privatisation policy of business sponsored schools means that undersubscribed schools can receive a funding boost from these businesses, which creates greater equality. And as you can see, my evaluation is shorter than my explanation, making it clear that it is the evaluation by using the term however. Finally, despite this policy, the majority of marketisation and privatisation policies has greater inequality as they favour higher achieving schools over disadvantaged schools. Now my application here is the fact that I've applied the funding. I'm talking about the funding formula, so that's application because I'm applying a specific policy to my argument. So that equates to application. So there's not much application in there, but I've still got the application there. So your task now is to make sure that your plan is fully complete. So that's every box on the planning sheet and the chain of reasoning conversation is filled in, and that's all 4 bubbles on the chain of reasoning that's completed. And then I want you to write your introduction and your first paragraph, but you cannot use the funding formula one that I've used in my model paragraph. You can't copy my paragraph. You've got to come up with one of your own.